Hi, my name is Stefan Kovac, Clinical Educator Emeritus here at Healthmark Industry, and I want to welcome you to our 7 days of continuing education video series celebrating you, the medical device reprocessing professional, and all the hard work you do every day. You could work in a CPD, SPD, MD, RD, CSSD, and endo, a small clinic, ambulatory care, anywhere where you're reprocessing medical devices. This information is for you. Some say knowledge is power. We believe the real power is when we are all sharing our knowledge with others. That's what we're going to do over these next 7 days is share our knowledge with you because you truly are the heartbeat of the hospital, reprocessing those medical devices every day, whether they're scopes or instruments or trays or cut down trays, it doesn't matter. You're doing a great job every day. So each day of CS Week 2023, Healthmark will release new educational videos worth 1 CEU. Yep, that's right. 7 CEUs in 7 days, just as a thank you from all of us at Healthmark. Everybody at Healthmark wants to say thank you for doing a great job every day. We want you to keep this in your thoughts as you watch these videos. Remember that you are doing amazing things right now. Build on those successes to make change where change needs to be made. So, how do you get that certificate? It's easy as 1, 2, 3. 1, watch the video. 2, click on the video link description. 3, take the quiz and pass it. It's that simple. But we need you to do one more thing. Please fill out the feedback form so we can continue to improve. Tell us what you want to know, and we will work on providing that information. So now, relax, sit back, and enjoy as we share our experience and knowledge with you. And again, we thank you for taking time out of your day to view the programs we have put together. Have a great CS Week 2023, and remember to always keep it clean. Take care. Bye now.
Hey everyone, welcome to one of our CS Week 2023 educational sessions. This one is called "Is This Thing Sterile?" and Understanding Event-Related Sterility. My name's Kevin Anderson, Clinical Education Specialist with Healthmark, and joining me I have Ralph Basile.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Kevin, to participate in the CS Week series, which was so successful last year. Yeah, and my title with Healthmark is Vice President of Marketing and Regulatory Affairs.
Yeah, and I'm glad he's going to be with us because, as you can see here, these are our objectives, and he's going to talk specifically to the validation procedure for manufacturers of sterile barrier systems. That will include wrap, containers, peel pouches, all of those things. And I think you're going to find that understanding a little bit about what the manufacturers have to do for those validation procedures will kind of help us better understand event-related sterility. And then we're going to define event-related sterility and discuss some examples. And then lastly, we're going to look at policy and procedure development for event-related sterility specifically. So hopefully that will give you a better understanding and maybe help you on your quest to build your policy and procedure at your facility as well. So with that, let's get into it. So I know that I've already kind of set you up and teed you up for this one, but we're going to talk about this validation procedure for the sterile barrier system.
Sure. Yeah, no, and hopefully this is helpful to folks that handle sterile packaging in healthcare facilities. I'm going to kind of be more focused on the validation of the packaging itself, but a lot of these principles also apply to single-use devices that are delivered sterile. So Kevin already gave some examples of sterile barriers. So it's sterile barrier systems, or the short for that is SBS. And examples of that include rigid containers, surgical wrap, and then also pouches, sterilization pouches. So in the United States, FDA classifies packaging, sterile barrier packaging, as a Class 2 device. In other markets, they can be classified as Class 1. Well, and it's class 2, and it requires clearance by the FDA. So you have to file with the FDA with all your test data, et cetera, and that goes through what typically would go through a 510K review, because that's where there's a predicate device. And usually in packaging, there is a predicate device, so you're comparing it to a product that's similar that already was cleared by the FDA. If it's a brand new product, it's also referred to as de novo, and there's actually even more testing that needs to be done to demonstrate efficacy of it. So what's involved in validation testing? And I'm just going to, really this is going to be high line on it. But first of all, you have to demonstrate that the sterilant is able to reach the contents of the packaging and with lethality. So, and you have to do this whether you're doing it with steam, whether it's ethylene oxide, whether it's one of the other newer modalities, vaporized hydrogen peroxide. You have to demonstrate in whatever modality you're testing in, you're labeling in, you have to show that the sterilant's getting there. You have to show that it maintains sterility in this and demonstrate a period of time, and we will talk about this some more when we talk about event related.
Yes.
But in your FDA filing, you have to have tested, and you can do accelerated aging, which it's an elevated temperatures, a specific humidity, and that means, I'll just give you an example, like 1 year accelerated typically is like about 30 days. 5 years might be like 120 days, and anything in between. You can do that and then claim that in your labeling, have that in your labeling, but you then also have to continue with a real-time aging product, and that's sitting on the shelf. And just, this question comes up a lot. So testing labs will have a plan for literally moving every month or every week or whatever. They will physically move the sterile barrier package to simulate the life in a sterile processing department. So.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that, and that helps me understand how.
And then at the end of that real lifetime period, you're going to test for sterility. Are the items are still sterile? That's the same thing with accelerated aging. Are the items still sterile inside of the pouch or packaging? And then you also need to show there's no toxicological interaction between the sterilant and the materials that the packaging is made of. With steam, it probably would be something like it melts.
Yeah.
EO, as you have to demonstrate aeration time. Right. And then when we get into some of the newer technologies like vaporized hydrogen peroxide systems, hydrogen peroxide is pretty aggressive. That's why it's good as a sterilant. Pretty aggressive, but there are plenty of materials that are not compatible, or that you can have an interaction with the sterilant. So your testing has to show that there is not this interaction, and it's not creating something that could be dangerous to the patient, toxicologically speaking. So, and then you have to show the physical robustness of the SBS, and it depends on the thing, but you do things like tear testing and seal strength and all those kinds of things, and I won't dive deep, but depending on the exact SBS and what your claim is, you have to demonstrate the physical robustness of the sterile barrier system.
Yeah, and one thing that they can't or don't do necessarily is maybe validate their packaging with wide varieties of different instruments or necessarily all the materials and things like that, right? So we were talking about, sometimes the count sheets themselves come into question, and I think is even mentioned in an IFU.
Thank you for it. That is. So typically, the manufacturer of a sterile barrier system is demonstrating that their packaging will get an item that's been validated to get sterile, can be sterilized in their system. But you typically are not testing specific devices or device designs within your sterile barrier system. That's really the responsibility of the device manufacturer to demonstrate that, yes, their product can get sterile in that modality. Now, for everything, there's always exceptions. And you will find some products, sterile barrier systems, that maybe have validated to a specific device or a specific class of device. And so then that will be reflected in their labeling. And the other thing too that your question brings up is, which is, your point is a good one. So steam, in the United States, we basically have 2 cycles that are typically found in a healthcare facility. It's either 270 degrees for 4 minutes or 275 degrees for 3 minutes. And most sterile barrier system manufacturers will validate both of those.
That's right. Yes.
Those modalities. EO, you've got, it's got its own typical cycle. The interesting one is, again, when you get into the vaporized hydrogen peroxide cycles, they have more cycles specific to device designs. And a common one is lumens, which usually is you're using more sterilant, maybe a longer cycle. It's actually, when we're talking about material compatibility, it's more stressful on the packaging.
Yep.
For you to claim that your SBS can be used in that cycle, let's say the lumen cycle, you have to test that specific cycle. So,
which makes sense, because as a former manager, I've looked up different devices, and certain ones were approved for only very specific cycles when it came to that modality. Yeah, so hopefully that helps make sense of the validation process and how it's going to pertain later to event-related. So this one is, getting into objective 2. We're talking about how we define event-related sterility, and obviously both of us are members of the AMI working groups that work on this standard, but hopefully by now, it was published in 2017, the newer one, everybody's at least familiar with it, but ANSI-AMI ST79 does a pretty good job of defining event-related sterility. Perhaps there could be some more, specifics in there, and that's what we're going to get into later. But if you wouldn't mind just kind of explaining a little bit about that.
No. So there's still in the industry this interpretation of event-related sterility, meaning that it's indefinitely sterile.
Yeah, forever.
And that's not what's meant by event-related sterility. What's meant by event-related sterility is that, okay, as a manufacturer of the sterile barrier system or a prepackaged sterile device, you've tested to a certain period of time for shelf life, and you've demonstrated that your item or items inside your packaging will remain sterile for that period of time. Your labeling can't claim anything beyond that, okay?
Right.
And this is the data that you provide to the FDA based upon your testing, and believe me, and we've just validated and gone through a number of sterile barrier system submissions, successful and others in progress. But the FDA very much wants to see your shelf life data. So you can't claim anything beyond what you've tested. What event sterility means is, hey, an event could occur before that shelf life ends that compromises, and I know we will talk about that in more detail, but it's an event that actually means, as a sterile processing professional, maybe I should consider that a compromised sterile package, even though it's still got 3 years of shelf life on the expiration date.
Right.
No, something happened to it that maybe has compromised sterility, and it needs to be pulled out of service, needs to be re-sterilized. If it's a single-use item, maybe needs to be tossed and replaced.
Exactly.
Those kinds of things. So I know we're going to go in a little bit. You've got some great photos to share, but just some examples of things that can occur that can compromise an SBS would be dropping a sterile package. Exposure to environmental conditions. We get this call every once in a while. The sprinkler system went off, can we consider those sterile barrier systems as still having sterile contents? Well, probably not, right? So, excessive movement, your department moves, or your moves either down the hall or across town, and maybe there was something that occurred during that transportation that has called into question the sterility. Time on the shelf. I say this all the time because, again, this interpretation of event-related sterility meaning indefinite. Your policy, the healthcare facility policy, can state that time is an event. Elapsed time
Yes.
is an event, and so I think it's the VA system. I think it's 2 years typically.
believe so,
I think
yeah.
it's probably, and again, I just use it as an example. But anything that's on the shelf for 2 years is going to be determined to no longer be sterile, or sterility is in question, and it's going to be removed. So that could be your facility policy. Overstacking and other poor practices, we'll get to see some great photos shortly. And then also there can be external contaminants that perhaps the sterile barrier system came in contact with. Maybe the contents are sterile, but maybe the outside of the package doesn't look like something you'd want to handle
that's right.
in the OR or whatever. So, yep.
Yeah, and so one thing that Auntie Amy does in the definition section of the document is it does define it. It does say sterility maintenance is not based on expiration dating, but rather on factors such as quality of packaging material, storage conditions, methods and conditions of transport, and the amount and conditions of handling. So that's kind of the definition as it is understood by AMI ST79. But like you already mentioned,
I think you were talking about.
Yeah.
In fact, I think we both serve on work group 40 for this that authors ST79, and maybe in a few months to a year we'll be taking that back up. And I think this is one of the areas that I think we can improve the clarity of what's in the standard, so that there is not this misunderstanding of what event-related means.
Exactly. And so hopefully this presentation will kind of help you understand a little bit better and make it a more clarified for you. But getting into some examples, I think it's always helpful to go through some pictures and see what's happening in the real world when it comes to breaches and sterility. Now, it may be a little bit difficult for you to see. I'm not sure how it will show up in the video, but I'm going to try my cursor here. But I actually was visiting a facility and just found this package with a hole on it, and I found it in storage. So that's something that could have happened during transport, during handling. It could have happened any number of ways. I put it in storage because that's where I found it. But this is something that I think that people should be training themselves and their staff to kind of always sort of be maybe officially or unofficially kind of auditing the shelves for potential breaches in sterility in their packaging. Especially this one, you may not be able to tell, but this is a scope for robotic procedures, and these are really expensive assets that usually people don't have very many of them.
Right.
And so just having one out of circulation could be devastating to a day of robotic surgery.
Can I ask you something too? That's a great photo, and I didn't realize what was in it. So those are expensive pieces of equipment.
Yep.
What about the stacking? Because I'm just wondering about that.
That's a great question, because I actually, once upon a time, that was a really big hot button issue, especially with accreditation surveyors, and to some extent rightfully so, because of the stacking practices can be particularly bad sometimes out there. But that being said, some of the language in ST79 between the 2015 version and 2017 version has changed. The newest or latest version says really to reference the IFU of the sterile barrier system. What does it say in terms of stacking, and follow that. So some of them I can tell you when it comes to blue wrap will say follow ANSI AMI guidelines, and while doing that, be careful not to compress or damage the packaging. Some of them will say specifically to try and avoid stacking at all costs. It just depends on which manufacturer you have, but it's a great one to kind of make sure that whatever manufacturer you're using, don't forget to reference their IFU when it comes to how you're supposed to store it, because that's a great question, and most people don't have that beautiful new shelving where each tray gets its own little
space.
So you're going to want to check that out for sure at your facility. Here's another one. This was found in the sterile storage area, but I do wonder if this one was more attributed to how it was handled or picked up and moved and all of that. It's possible it was a transport issue or handling. But hopefully you can see on the right side of the package the tape has totally lifted there. And definitely I would recommend, at least myself as a former OR nurse, I would not use that package, and I would hope that everybody would see that and understand, hey, there's a compromise there in the security of that
I
tray.
can share too. I know there have been reports in the industry of tape, the adhesive failing, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Unfortunately,
right.
it looked like you can't tell totally in this picture, but the other packages, the tape was intact. But there are sometimes those circumstances, and maybe it was an environmental one. Maybe there was something
exposed to something.
yeah, that we don't know about that was unique to
Sure,
that package. But for whatever reason, tape came up. That tray should probably not be used and then
No, it doesn't look like
reprocessed.
that.
Yeah.
The sterility's been maintained.
Yeah, exactly. So
Sure.
so definitely want to move on from that one and redo it. This is another one where it might be a little bit challenging to see. I'm going to try and
Yeah,
get
what
my
do we
pointer
look
on
at?
it. But hopefully you can see there are some dust bunnies clinging really hard to this package. And this is one that you mentioned a little bit earlier, but dust bunnies may not necessarily come in contact with the contents of the package, like so what you're trying to keep sterile. But if you've ever seen the opening process of opening up a sterile field, you should not open packages like that near a sterile field because the dust bunnies could actually fall into it.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
How does a dust bunny get into sterile processing?
That's a great question. So part of the problem is we have to be diligent about cleaning our storage areas. And you might be able to see in the background there's a bunch of containers, colorized containers that hold these peel pouches. And that is not uncommon. It's a great way to organize them. The problem is you have to get back in there and investigate whether or not they're collecting dust. And chances are they probably are. And so we have to make sure that we're in there on a routine, periodic basis and cleaning those out. The other challenge to that is these sterile storage locations could be all over the hospital, not necessarily just in sterile
Gotcha.
processing.
Sure,
so we have to
sure.
make sure that even in this one, this particular picture, this was a sterile storage that was right next to the ORs, not necessarily in sterile processing's area.
That doesn't make me feel any better.
Yeah, yeah, I know. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of
Okay.
people that have to be on board in terms of taking care of the storage area. And that includes watching out for those dust bunnies. So hopefully that's not what's happening in your facility, but if it's questionable or maybe you don't know, hopefully now you'll think to go around and actually look at what's going on and take care of it. Here's another one that we talked about a little bit earlier, stacking, but this is a pretty bad example. Unfortunately, I think this happens still very frequently at facilities. I don't know if you can tell or even notice first off, but both on the right and left of this cart, there's nice, neat shelving there, but this is a transport cart. The stickers indicate that these are loaner trays. They were probably done up for a case, and they're just waiting there. I don't know who put them there. Could have been an industry representative from a manufacturer. Could have been a staff member. But it just goes to show you that, one, we have to not only provide the right storage conditions, but the right transport carts. We have to always be auditing the process, putting our eyes on it, and training people, whether they're industry reps or staff, it doesn't matter, but we have to always be watching out for this. And unfortunately, we even, in this particular example, you have probably the heaviest trays, the biggest trays are on top of the smaller trays, and so you have potential there for compromising all kinds of packages. So something to be aware of. Now this one, I don't know, can you even tell what's wrong with this one? It is a little bit difficult, but I'm going to try and get my pointer back up there. But right in here, right next to the load sticker, hopefully people can see that, but it looks like the seal was actually sealed with folds in it. So, for those of you in sterile processing that are watching this, hopefully you already know this, but there shouldn't be folds going through your heat seal. This was obviously a heat seal peel pouch rather than a self-seal or what have you. And
So maybe they sealed at the wrong temperature, too high a temperature, and it melted the
Yep,
possibly
that could be, or there was a fold in there while they did it,
while
and
they were
it
doing
just.
it. Yeah.
But either way, hopefully they're inspecting all the seals that they're doing, and then again, the end user, whoever's opening,
Right.
will also know to look for this.
One of the biggest test protocols in packaging, particularly for it really applies to pouches, is
Yep.
seal integrity.
Yes.
That the manufacturer has to demonstrate.
And actually, that's a great transition because this next picture will
Okay.
show you that sometimes our heat sealers, and hopefully the people viewing can see this pretty well, but you can see a defect here and here and here and here. But this one
a channel
looks like an entire channel that goes all the way through the seal, and then of course, again, hopefully people are looking for this both in sterile processing, but also at the end user experience. You know, when you're opening these packages, hopefully they know to look for this. That's why I included it here, because otherwise the packaging there may not be any holes, there may not be any dust,
Right.
there might not be moisture, all of those things that most people know.
Yeah.
But hopefully they're looking at
and to
seals.
get back to the validation testing, you
Yep.
need to state the parameters at which you're sealing.
Yes.
So and it's a range, right? But,
Yep.
And the pressures and all that. But so yeah.
Yeah, so a real important one to look out for that, unfortunately, just for people who are viewing this, I do see this commonly. So if you do have peel pouches, which most of you do, go check them out. Make sure your heat seals are looking good. And then here's another one. You've probably seen this in your travels too.
Sure.
I know you visited a lot of facilities, but this is one I see very commonly. I don't know, there's many reasons for this, but there's some things that you may or may not notice about this picture. The obvious one being that it's overly stuffed. Yeah, it's overly stuffed. There's a lot of instruments and peel pouches just stuffed into this bin. But also, these are Cobb elevators. So I don't know, in my experience, and I worked in heavy ortho arenas myself, we weren't often going out and looking for Cobb elevators separately. So I don't know why there's so many. Like in most cases, when it comes to peel pouch items, you should only have anywhere between like 2 and 6 of a par level. And anything more than that, you're either not using it or you're using it so often that maybe it should be in a set.
In a different,
you know what I mean? So
right.
you should really assess why you have that many crammed into a storage container. So some things to think about there, and obviously those instruments are very heavy too, and they have sharp edges. So all things that are not conducive to this storage.
Kind of storage
yeah.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah.
So hopefully that's another good example for people. This one I put in there for various reasons. We didn't have any really good examples of rigid containers that had compromised sterility, so I put this one in there for a few reasons. It's a great example to think about with rigid containers. We should be checking the filters. Filter plates are subject to damage or maybe even user error, wear and tear, all of those things.
Yep.
They could fall down and then all of a sudden your filter is totally missing.
Not there.
Yeah, so it is something to look out for. The locks. The locks should be intact. I was just visiting a facility yesterday, and I looked, and the locks all looked good on one side, and I actually had access to the backside and looked at the backside, and one of the locks was completely missing. So it was totally gone. So that's a definite.
You have to assume that is not sterile anymore.
That's right,
and
that's
reprocess
gone.
That set. Yeah,
Yep.
sure.
And plus your indicators, a lot of these locks have indicators on them, like that black dot, and that should be, looked at as well as something you may not see very easily up here is this corner. It may be lifting off, but it's definitely dented, and it looks like it could possibly be lifting off, which means the gasket isn't necessarily intact and
sure.
making contact. So all of those things are going through my mind, and something for people to be aware of in terms of checking for event-related sterility. That would be one that I would recommend reopening and re-sterilizing.
Right, maybe having the container serviced in some way too.
Yeah, and I put I put handling up there because somewhere along the line that lid was probably dropped. And I've been in facilities and I've witnessed sometimes how people handle these trays, both in the OR and in sterile processing. I'm sad to say sometimes these things really get manhandled and thrown around, and like you can hear a bunch of banging and clanging going on and decontam and all this stuff. So we want to take care of these. These metals they're metal and they're rigid, but they still are pliable, and they're, it's pretty easy to dent them because they're made of lighter metals that are, supposed to help keep you under that 25-pound weight limit. So stuff to be aware of in your facility. And then lastly, we're going to get into the policy procedure development part, because I think this is one of the things that I think is overlooked and where we could get better a little bit when it comes to developing our policy and procedure on this. So the number one thing is to understand your references and always use references for your policies and procedures as much as you possibly can. And we're going to get into some examples, a few of them for IFUs, but also your standards and guidelines, whether it's ST79 or AORN or both. But understand that you're going to see some similarities between all of these. So this is just a common rigid container IFU, and I just pointed out, hey, they did 360 days of testing.
So they report how long the testing was.
They put that right in there.
Sterility was maintained.
And then they also recommend at the bottom of their graph there that facilities should establish their own policy and procedure on this, and that they also mentioned that their testing methods were in accordance with ANSI ST79 and ASHRAE. So some interesting things that they put in there that you might see some commonalities here as we continue.
Well, and you talk about IFUs as a great example. We talked about it before, but that's it. When you're filing with FDA, what you're doing is validating you're providing the data that demonstrates the IFU you're providing to the end user will result in a sterile product. And I don't want to dive too deep, but you generally will do like worst case testing. So in the case of sterility, oftentimes it's the most difficult cycle when maybe to achieve sterility or material compatibility. And it also, we didn't talk about weight, but you also are testing the load weight as well as the amount of weight in your tray as well, and we're talking about rigid container here, or a pouch or peel pouch or whatever. Wrapped tray, but that's all gets reported to FDA as part of your testing. So that's why you file the IFU, because that's what's been tested, right?
Exactly. Perfect. Yeah. And you're going to see that there's going to be commonalities here. So this is an IFU of the blue wrap. I don't expect people to be able to read this when they're watching I'm just trying to point out some commonalities here, and obviously encourage users out there to actually look at these parts of the IFUs so that they have a little better understanding of it.
No, I'm glad you did this, and I have great sympathy for healthcare facilities, because now you've got something on your shelf that says 30 days, and you've got something else that says 360 days, and you're about to show, I think, our validation, which is 5 years.
Yes.
How do you make sense of that?
How do you manage it all? Yes. And we're trying to say, like this IFU is saying time testing should not prevent a facility from using established protocols, and what I think they're referencing is the event-related sterility definition in ANSI ST79.
Right.
So how that question is very valid, and to your point, this is a peel pouch IFU, and we have 5 years of testing for sterility assurance and shelf life, and we also point out, and others will point out too, but we have environmental conditions we recommend. And
I appreciate you putting it in. So this is our IFU.
Yes.
So, this comes from being asked this question so many times over the years. We were 5 degrees above the range you provided over the weekend. Is the package still sterile? And so that's why we try to word it in such a way that it's long-term storage, right? If your humidity falls outside of this range for a limited period of time, the items. When we do accelerated aging testing, for instance, it's at much higher temperatures than this. Right. And like I mentioned, it would be 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, et cetera. So But it's difficult for manufacturers to give you hard and fast rules. So sometimes we do end up with what I appreciate is somewhat vague language, but we do say long-term extended storage is what we're trying to get at. Not, hey, we're out of the temperature or humidity over the weekend or something like that. So
I'm glad you brought that up because that's a very real conversation that I've
I-
actually had with
well, yeah.
surveyors and myself. So I'm glad that
Yes,
you mentioned that.
yeah.
That's hopefully helping somebody out there right now.
Yeah,
But yeah, you're going to see all these different IFUs will have different validation testing in terms of time, which is an interesting thing to try and manage as a facility. And then you also have AORN guidelines to reflect on. They also talk about the environmental controls, like we mentioned in the last IFU. They also talk about event-related issues like seal breakage, package integrity, moisture exposure. They also talk about exposure to airborne contaminants. And another one that we actually...
Nice list of event-related.
Exactly, yep. And one that would be obviously included in here is we actually had, in my experience, we had a flood from rain come in, and we were located in the basement, so it came even into our sterile storage area.
Okay.
And so we had some packages, at least along the wall, that we had
That
to...
they got wet.
Yep.
Yeah.
So some unique things that can happen.
Yeah.
But hopefully that guidance helps. And then this is just a slide to show you, remind you of the definition, but this is also basically everything that is said in terms of shelf life in SD79. So that's where, yes, you use the SD79, you got to use your IFUs, but you also should put examples into your policy procedure so that people have, some concrete decision-making ability with their policy.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Sure.
So you also have to address who is this policy for, all right? We automatically think OR, sterile processing, and we should. We might even think of OB right away, and that's great. The problem is we have a lot of procedural areas that we service now in sterile processing, cath lab, interventional radiology, and there's numerous. I mean, I was at a medium facility and we had 19 other places that we were servicing.
Wow.
And I'll just tell you, back when I was in the ER, I worked there for a while, I saw sterile trays on the shelf. I couldn't tell you that I was looking for locks or indicators or any of that stuff or filters.
Just hadn't gotten that training.
I hadn't gotten that training.
Okay.
So don't assume that anyone or everyone in healthcare that interfaces with sterile packaging knows all of this. And so in order to do, to get it out to all these folks, I definitely recommend using some tips like using...
If I want to interrupt you
Yeah.
go to the tip. But I do want to mention, we've been very much focused on the packaging that is sterile processing typically is going to use then. But
Yes.
what you're saying, there's plenty of areas that they get prepackaged single-use items, and these same principles apply.
Yes.
So I
that's
didn't
a
mean to
great
interrupt you,
point.
but,
no, that's a great point. And and those happen even outside of areas that use hospital sterilized items. So that is
patient rooms. Right?
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the things I like to try and encourage people to do that are the experts that write the policies on event-related sterility is to share those through the learning management system that the healthcare institution already has in place. I'm sure all of you are out there in facilities where you have to go online and you have to do mandatory education every year. I know I did. I had a ton of modules I had to do and policy read and signs and all of that stuff. This is a policy read and sign and maybe there should even be some questions associated with it that everyone in healthcare really needs to have that education to understand event-related sterility and get outside of just the OR. This should go to everybody. So I went to that one even though it's the last bullet because it was top of my mind, but use your healthcare institution's policy template. Consider providing some guidance for those instances when it may be less obvious. And I put an example in there like staining on a peel pouch. This is something that
Which is common.
it's pretty common.
Happens.
It does happen. Yep. It may not happen all the time at your facility. It may be something that you see intermittently. But provide some guidance. What are you going to do when that happens at your facility? Are you going to consider it contaminated or not? And tell the people how you want that to be handled in your policy. Use some specific examples of various types of conditions during storage, transport, and handling. I like to bring up, when it comes to handling, peel pouches, because there were people, I'm just going to say and be honest, there were people who put them under their armpit and carry them around because they need two hands to open the door and all this. Yeah. And really, your armpit can be a place of moisture and all that. So you really shouldn't be carrying a peel pouch or a blue wrapped item in your armpit or any of that. Obviously, a rigid container you're not going to put there, but those are some things that maybe you don't think of necessarily, but should be addressed in your policy and procedure. Again, use references from the IFUs and guidelines. Include all the right people, anyone who handles transports and uses sterile packages. So hopefully that gives you kind of some practical tips, if you will, for developing your policy and procedure. And again, to kind of close the loop on the time-related studies and all of that, and having all the various times that are studied from the different manufacturers. I think that's something that you do need to consider when you put your policy and procedure together. Yeah. And get a sample of all these IFUs and look at what their shelf lives are and see how you're going to handle that, and put it into writing so that when you are surveyed or when somebody else questions you have, yes, yeah. Exactly. And so
following your policies.
Yep. And that basically concludes this CS Week educational program on event-related sterility. So I hope that was helpful, and I appreciate you joining and sharing the expertise from the manufacturer side.
No, thank you, Kevin.
Yep. All right. Enjoy the rest of your CS Week.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marianne Drosnock, Director of Clinical Affairs here at Healthmark Industries. I'd like to thank you for watching today's CE program. If you got something out of today's video, please hit the like button and then be sure to subscribe to the Healthmark Education channel so you can know as soon as we post more educational content. By liking and sharing our videos and by subscribing to our channel, you are helping us grow. That way we can share the message of patient safety to more sterile processing and endoscopy processing communities, as well as our OR and IP partners. To get your 1 CE certificate for viewing today's video, there is a link in the video description that will take you to the quiz. Just complete the quiz with a 70% or better, enter your name and email, and you will be issued a 1 CE certificate immediately. You can download that certificate right to your device, or it will be emailed to the address that you provided. Thank you again for watching, and we hope you had a great CS Week 2023. Bye.